Hey, P World History, back at it again. Mr. Sandoval here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about China's influences on Southeast Asia. So first off, we're going to talk about China and their influence on Korea. Um, so uh, Korea is going to be one of the first places that Chinese influence spread, and that's going to be due when China conquers part of what is modern day Korea. And so some of the cultural elements that are going to be adopted by Koreans are going to be things like Buddhism, Confucianism, the style of government, the form of the government, as well as models of behavior for both the family and women. Okay, so the impact that this is going to have on Korean women, it's going to change their cultural practices when these Chinese influences come in. So women are no longer going to be allowed to live and raise their children in her parents' home. So a cultural practice for Korean women was that the husband would move in with the woman and her family, and they would live with her parents. With the influence of Chinese culture, this is going to change, and it's now going to transition to a more patriarchal society where things, for instance, this case, right, a woman is going to move in with her husband and his family. Some other practices that are going to fade away, the husband being buried with the wife's family. Now that's going to flip. The wife is going to be buried with the husband's family. Uh, the remarriage of widowed or divorced women, right? Women being able to inherit property. Those things are going to kind of fade away with Chinese influence. Okay, China and Vietnam. Okay, so some of the Chinese elements that are going to be adopted by the Vietnamese. Again, talking about culture. So things like Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism. Again, kind of government styles. The examination system, right, kind of goes along with Confucianism and different art and literary styles. Those things are going to be um, adopted and take part of Vietnamese culture. Okay. However, these other things or some of these things are forced upon the Vietnamese. So the Chinese are forcing the Vietnamese to kind of partake in some of these cultural practices. So, for example, Confucian-based schools are forced upon the Vietnamese, making Chinese the official language for businesses. So the Vietnamese language is not seen as great as Chinese, and so therefore Chinese is the official language. That's going to be forced on the Vietnamese. Chinese clothing and hairstyle, the way the Chinese agricultural techniques, right? And so when these things are being forced on the Vietnamese, right? That's anytime somebody's forced to do something, typically that's met with a little bit of resistance, right? Anytime you are forced to do chores or clean something, right? It's like, and you don't do it willingly, right? There's a little bit of pushback. So just like these cultural practices are being forced upon the Vietnamese, that's going to result in some resistance and pushback. Although there are going to be several failed rebellions, um, eventually there will be a successful one in roughly the 10th century, and the Tang dynasty is going to weaken a little bit when that happens. But again, right, these things are being forced upon Vietnamese. Hey, some uniquely Vietnamese cultural elements that are going to remain, even though these Chinese influences are coming in, right? The Vietnamese, although they're being forced to use Chinese for business, they're going to maintain their Vietnamese language. This practice or this cultural norm of chewing betel nuts is going to hang around. Women having a greater role in society is going to hang around, and cockfighting, which is having these roosters to the left fight and watching that for entertainment. That's a cultural practice that is gonna stay, even though Chinese elements are influencing the Vietnamese. Okay, then we get to China and Japan. So unlike Korea and Vietnam, Japan is physically separated from China. Right? Japan is an island, so there is no land physical connection to China. So the result of that is that Japan is never going to be invaded or conquered by China, like parts of Korea and like modern day Vietnam, or the area that is modern day Vietnam, right? there's no way for those interactions to be forced upon them. So that means everything that Japan adopts as far as Chinese culture and practice is all voluntary, meaning Japan looks at it, says, hey, we like that, and now we are going to, put that into part of our culture. And so that's going to mean that Japan is going to be able to retain their very unique Japanese culture, and only take in and adopt and mesh with their culture Chinese practices. Okay, so early Japan is organized around family-based clans, and they control different regions of Japan. Right? Each family descended from some kind of ancestor, and each clan worshipped this ancestor as a special kami, which is a spirit. Okay? And then Shinto is this belief that kamis live within all people, animals, and nature. So Shintoism is like considered a religion, a type of religion that's practiced in Japan or early Japan. Okay, so eventually all these little clans will begin to unify and kind of begin to form kind of a modern one Japanese state. And so Japan is going to begin to then model itself after China in some ways, as these groups are unifying and coming together. And so some things they're going to adopt from China: Buddhism and Confucianism, Chinese style of courts. So again, kind of that government system, their taxation system, their Chinese style of writing, right? So a lot of these things are going to mold into Japanese culture. And Japanese culture early on, the Heian period is an important period in Japanese history, and that's roughly from 800 to 1200. And so the capital of Japan at the time is Heian, which is why it's called the Heian period. Later, this Heian is going to be renamed to Kyoto. And so in this Heian period, they focus on beauty, and we're going to see that in some things like their architecture. And so they are influenced by Chinese art and literature. They spend hours each day writing letters and poems, right? Calligraphy, right? The way you write. So there was not only was it the beauty seen in what you're writing as far as what it says, but the way you write it as far as how beautiful all the markings are, and that kind of thing. So, right, this architecture here is representative of the Heian period, right? And that's kind of, for some people at least, that stereotypical image we have when we think of, Japanese history and kind of Japanese buildings historically, right? We think of something that kind of looks like that, Japanese palaces and things. Okay, so in their search for beauty during the Heian period, the government is going to kind of take a back seat. So they're going to be focusing on art and architecture and literature and all these things. And government is going to kind of take a back seat, which is going to cause some problems. So their centralized government's going to break down. The emperor is going to lose power. And this is going to create a new shift into feudal Japan. So going from like a strong centralized government to more of a feudal system now. And so in feudal Japan, similar to feudal Europe, right? So those feudal systems are very, very similar. They're going to look a little different in the details, but the structure and concepts are pretty much the same. So again, in feudal Japan, right, at the top you have the emperor, and in reality, they have very little power, and they're more of a political figure, symbol kind of thing. Okay, then below the emperor, you have shoguns, and these shoguns are like military generals or very powerful lords, right? And they're the ones who have all the political and military power, right? They're kind of the true power under the emperor. Okay, so the shoguns are kind of the ones running the show. Then under the shoguns, you have the daimyos, and they are local lords, and they own private estates. They have their own private armies, right? And they typically, are allied to a specific shogun, right? And they themselves are always at war and in a hiff with each other. Below the daimyo, right, the local lords, below the daimyo, you have samurai, right, who are the iconic Japanese warriors. And so the samurai would pledge allegiance to a daimyo, and then they would fight for that daimyo. Some couple little notes, right? The code of Bushido is the samurai code of honor, so similar to chivalry, like the knight's code of honor. Japanese samurai have their own code of honor, which is the code of Bushido. They also practice something we'll look at in a slide coming up, the next slide, I believe, seppuku, which is a ritualistic suicide, and in which they would slash their belly and kill themselves. And samurai would do this to keep their honor. It was seen as a way of keeping their honor. So if they were defeated in battle, right, they weren't killed yet, but defeated in battle, rather than being taken a prisoner or something, they were dishonored because they had been defeated. So they would perform this ritual to maintain their honor. Or had they dishonored their family or Japan or anything else in any other way, right, they could help maintain their honor or restore their honor by this seppuku practice. Okay, and below the samurai are the peasants, right? And that's pretty much everybody else. If you're not a daimyo, you're not a samurai, you're not a shogun, you're not an emperor, you're everybody else, the peasants, right? And these people worked on the land, they pay all the taxes, and in return, they receive a place to live and protection, right? So they're doing all the heavy work, but in return, they have a place to live and they're protected by the samurai, right? The samurai are being paid by these daimyo, and these daimyo are loyal to the shoguns. And then right at the top, you have this figurehead, the emperor, who again has very little power in reality, but is still the emperor. Okay, and so here we have a few pictures of different Japanese samurai, paintings and things. In that top right corner, right below me, right, there's an artwork recreation of the seppuku practice. Same thing to the left of that, right? Another instance in which somebody is performing seppuku. The two left pictures show samurai in their traditional samurai attire, right? Their armor, their swords, right? They would have a long sword in the back, possibly some kind of knife or short sword on their hip or something, right? They have this plated armor and things. So again, images of some traditional samurai attire. Okay. And lastly, Japanese women. So for women in Japan, they are going to escape the more oppressive features of Chinese Confucian culture. Again, Confucianism, right, stresses the importance of those relationships, filial piety, and one of those concepts is the explanation of relationships, and with that is expressed kind of the subordination of women, and how women should be loyal to husband, kind of thing. And so Japan, although they're going to embrace parts of Confucianism and things, they're not going to enact the Confucian exams. They're not going to take on full-blown Confucianist values. And so some freedoms for women that are going to continue for Japanese women, or hang around for Japanese women, they're going to be able to inherit property. They're going to be able to live separately from husbands. They could get divorced fairly easily if they chose to. And if they were widowed or divorced, they were allowed to remarry. And so those are some things that Japanese women are going to be able to do that Chinese women necessarily couldn't, or was very difficult, or far and few between for Chinese women. Okay, so that is kind of our influences China had on Southeast Asia. Again, hopefully you learned something. Have a good one.